All right. I attended my first Creative Mornings talk in 2014, I believe, almost 10 years ago. And I remember sitting there at Area 405 and thinking, I hope I'm important enough to give one of these talks one day. That I've done something that people deem valuable and significant and worth sharing. And over the last decade, I would ebb and flow between thinking that I had something to say, even putting that out there to the Creative Mornings team sometimes, sorry about that, and not attending the talks because I was too busy trying to accomplish something worthy enough. So along comes the word sanctuary, and here I am. When I sat down to gather my thoughts, I imagined that I was asked to give this talk because of my former life in ministry, or because I own a cocktail bar called church. Or maybe because I've been in a lot of sanctuaries in my life. Or because I think there aren't enough of them out there. Or because I've spent the last decade trying to build someone's sanctuary, whether it's in a workplace, in a team of like-minded people, in a glass, or around a table. But I might disappoint you, that's not what this talk's going to be about. The reality is that I don't know what it means to be important enough to give this talk. And when I was asked, I said yes, because I remembered the last 10 years and the fact that I sincerely wanted to be that important. Maybe being asked to speak meant that I was, after all. But then I had the realization that if I gave this talk as the person that I assume Creative Mornings thought they asked for, that I could deliver on expectations as I've done many times before, but I would come home afterwards and feel like a fraud. I would leave and exhale for the first time and wonder if I ever even spoke at all. I would regret not saying the things I should have said, and I would regret not being brave enough to be honest. So maybe that's why I chose to speak here in an actual sanctuary. Say what you want about a church or organized religion, but I knew that for me, being here might just keep me honest. It might just, by some higher power, compel me to be authentic about what the word sanctuary means to me, and all the places I thought I'd find it, and all the unexpected ways I was lucky enough to actually experience it. So put simply, I make cocktails for a living, and that has made me a student of words. When I name a drink, I trace keywords through history to find the perfect one, a word that will inadvertently reference the ingredients within. So when I think about sanctuary, I don't start literally. Despite the obvious through lines in my story, I start with the word itself. The Latin word sanctus means holy, so a sanctuary would be a place of holiness. But that led me to so many other questions. How do we define holiness? What is it to be holy, to be divine, to be devout? Where does holiness emanate from? Why would it dwell in a sanctuary? Does it have to be a physical building or room, or is it less rigid than that? Could I myself be that place? Could I be holy? All those questions, in one way or another, I've spent my life trying to answer, whether theologically, which I will probably spare you from today, you're welcome for that, or existentially. Of course, in sanctuaries like where we sit right now, I have from time to time found a place of holiness. However, that understanding of holiness wasn't always the refuge I expected. It was sometimes unforeseen pain. In brick and mortar sanctuaries, I both boxed myself in with boundaries and secrets in an effort to keep myself safe from perceived danger. And I also buried myself alive in the same box and put myself in real danger without anyone noticing. So maybe they weren't sanctuaries after all. Not for me, anyway. About 20 years ago now, despite growing up in Sunday school until I stopped believing, I ran back into organized religion and fully immersed myself in the safety that it offered. I desperately needed new friends. And as a shockingly self-aware teenager, I know that's hard to believe, that's where I went to find the refuge of community. And at the time, and for many years after, the quote from Scripture of faith without works is dead was something I took very seriously, emphasis on works. Music on Sundays, youth group leader, small group leader, church planter, on into a bachelor's and master's degree in theology from the world's largest and most talked about Christian university. A lot of folks know that part of my story and what it gave me, but what no one knows is what those years took from me. Despite what I know about the Bible and what I know of God, those years reinforced the idea from my childhood that love is earned, not freely given, and that one's feelings don't need to be acknowledged or heard. It's about the needs of others, it's not about my own. My worth is tied up in how I make others feel, not how I am made to feel. So that cocktail of mental illness and anxious attachment styles does not a sanctuary make. The narrative I was given by the church in their own discomfort included bigotry's greatest hits, like love the sinner, hate the sin, God will remove your sinful desires, and a personal favorite, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. And that, my friends, is when I discovered the power of good PR. I could portray whoever I needed to in order to survive. I became a chameleon who dated men for show, obviously, who went to Bible study and then shut down the bar every night, who could be accepted if I just said the right thing at the right time. And brick by brick, I built what I thought was a sanctuary of safety. But when the PR stops working and you're found out anyways, what then? One day, I posted a picture of myself with the human I would later marry. Sorry, I don't know why I'm getting choked up. This is like the dumbest story. It's about Instagram. Jesus. And I said we were in a relationship. You remember when we used to do that? Like it was a whole big deal. It was official. All that anyone saw was that this human happened to be a cis woman. And the lights came on and everything that I hid in the shadows, all the things that I had kept secret and safe, were exposed in the light. The facade was gone, and where I once was welcome, I wasn't anymore. I guess you could say that this was a pivotal moment in more than one way. First off, my days in the church were over, and my love for building sanctuary would shift to its very unusual new home in the hospitality industry, where I also had experience. I also had to be out and proud now, and I had to be unequivocally so. And probably the most important pivot, and the one I've never really talked about before, was that whatever facade I used to survive next had to be bulletproof. I couldn't be exposed like that again. And the facade I curated is the public image you all have come to know. As my career in hospitality developed, so did Chelsea Gregoire. She was confident and self-assured and took no shit. I heard I can say that here. She was a leader and a consummate professional. She was passionate and extroverted and a badass. I woke up every morning and I put her on like I put on my suit and I tied my tie. I would accessorize with righteous anger and high expectations and a work until the job is done attitude. Chelsea Gregoire has been awarded many accolades, from Best Bartender by Baltimore Magazine to an Eater Young Gun to America's Beverage Director of the Year. I guess that person is bowing somewhere. And I was shocked that every time I won a new award, I couldn't accept the praise or the clout or what the meaning of that award was. And my very enlightened diagnosis for that misalignment was that my gender and my pronouns were wrong. It couldn't possibly be the fact that I had PR'd myself into burnout and exhaustion. It couldn't possibly be the fact that my bulletproof facade was so antithetical to who I actually was that it was making me very sick with crushing burnout and the stress of maintaining that image. In order to be bulletproof, though, the facade required layers and maintenance and intense upkeep. I couldn't just be queer. I needed to be visibly so. So I cherished and magnified every opportunity to be the diversity hire, the token gay in every room. I painted on the layer of my gender expression as more than masculine of gender so that I could camouflage myself to fit in a room of straight men. I painted on a layer of a very public, very happy marriage. I painted on the layer of a very shiny and thought-provoking social media presence so that I could always control the narrative. And layer by layer, I painted myself into a very bulletproof and very lonely existence. Remember the scene in some books and film where someone would be running, trying to escape the horrors that chased them when they would find themselves at the door of a church. And suddenly they would start beating their fists against the tall, sullen doors and yell one word, Anybody know what it is? Hint, it's the theme. Sanctuary! Over and over until someone let them inside. Even the most hardened of criminals could not be arrested in the refuge of the sanctuary of a church. It's true. The building up of my own sanctuary of disguise was not to find holiness, but rather to find safety and refuge, to be able to hide in plain sight. Because that's how I learned to deal with most everything. But it didn't keep me safe at all. The sanctuary that I thought I would find in my ironclad facade just surrendered me to my most vindictive devices. And though the facade was supposed to be bulletproof, it could not withstand the weight and pressure that was being placed on it. 18 different restaurant openings was a lot of pressure. A lack of access to mental health care in the US is a lot of pressure. Managing my own personal relationships within this persona was a lot of pressure, and so the cracks began to show. Back in 2012, before I left college, I was diagnosed with a misnomer of a condition, borderline personality disorder. Now, the jury's still out on whether this disorder is fed by nature or nurture, but is closely related to PTSD in that it often develops from trauma. And the symptoms of BPD boil down to emotions and events being felt in drastic extremes and a very skewed, very damaging view of self. And my BPD, whether because a good therapist is hard to find or because of a lack of health insurance, was largely unchecked and untreated for almost a decade. BPD symptoms are exacerbated by stress, which defined my entire work life. They make relationships a nightmare, my poor ex-wife. And I had generated a whole PR spin of a personality on top of my already distorted view of self. So you can imagine, with cracks and chips appearing in every layer of my carefully managed facade, a tipping point was incoming. But the world beat me to it, COVID hit. The last unblemished layer of what I thought was my sanctuary shattered overnight, and a reckoning began to take place. Would the government step in and save the restaurant industry? Or would we have to save it ourselves? I stood very firmly in the belief that if the restaurant industry was about to catch fire, let it burn to the ground. Hospitality was built out of slavery, and tipping was designed as a way to keep those structures alive. Hospitality workers suffer from chronic food and housing insecurity, unstable, if available at all, healthcare, and work that demands just as much, if not more, emotional labor than it does physical. Not to mention systemic substance abuse, late nights, sexual harassment, power dynamics, the list goes on and on. Everything was going to have to be reworked and rebuilt if hospitality was going to be sustainable at all. The concept for a little cocktail bar called church had been kicking around in my brain for about 8 years, and it could be structured to maybe start to address some of the injustice of it all. So I got to work writing the business plan, finding the building, finding investors, and 2 long years of build-out began. I was building a new sanctuary, and this time more literally. This time I would build the sanctuary I wanted to see for the future of hospitality. This was my chance to be important. In many ways, this was achieved. A style of hospitality that puts as much emphasis on the people as it does the drinks and food. Built-in opportunities for growth and education that wouldn't be extractive or expensive, equitable tipping and working structures, an accessible building. Many things are yet to come, and we have not seen the final evolution. There are few things on earth quite as stressful and personally depleting as opening a restaurant or bar. I was managing investments, construction, licensing, and legal, hiring, and writing every bit of framework the business and staff would have. On top of this, I was building some of the furniture, decor, and design elements myself, and taking on lots of small projects in the space, like painting the walls and binding menus and more. In November of 2021, though, my momentum came to a screeching halt, and the rest of those fractured layers shattered. I went on a trip to see some close friends in Seattle, one of which was suffering from cancer at the time, and the other 2 just to catch up and reset, as they had both known me probably the longest of anyone in my life. The Chelsea Gregoire facade had put more than miles between us. And suddenly, sitting in front of them, it all became abundantly clear just how far I had traveled from myself. I had to explain to one why I disappeared at all. To another, I parsed through my marriage and my gender. And the other, I was reminded why I love hospitality in the first place. And then I sat, broken and raw, on the ferry, and I wept. And I felt like the real me for the first time in years. The scared little kid who had been hiding deep inside me, bruised and beaten, who couldn't understand why I disliked them so much and why I hid them away from the world. In May of 2022, I went on a trip to Nashville and saw some friends from college. We talked about all the ways we had to learn how to survive, deprogram ourselves, write our own holy texts to live by. In those moments, I found power and devastation and even more of myself. And despite trying to put the disguise back on, drape it over my shoulders, hide under it, it no longer fit me. What I built up as my tower no longer kept me safe or felt like refuge or felt holy to me at all. It felt untrue. It felt like a betrayal. I felt anger with myself about how I had boxed myself in and kept myself there. At one time it served me, and now it no longer did. So what now? Do I start building a new sanctuary, brick by lonely brick? Could Church the Bar be my sanctuary too? Probably the most incredible but disarming part of my facade shattering was the level of truth I saw in front of me, and that suddenly I was able to speak to myself. My BPD could no longer go unchecked or untreated, so I started seeing a therapist and started taking the medication that I needed. My wife and I needed more than we were able to give each other and landed on the reality that we may be best friends and just best friends, and got divorced accordingly. The people in my life that had been so attracted and attached to that bulletproof facade, spanning from family to friends to colleagues, were given an unspoken alert that the person they once knew is gone and never really existed in the first place. If I was going to build a new sanctuary for myself, this undoing was the preparation of the earth, the laying of the foundation. I remember a warm summer night working on projects at church, sitting in what would become the dining room in the dark. When the realization came to me, I was not the same person who started this project, who pitched and pushed and labored over every excruciating detail. I looked around me and I saw all the religious trauma that turned into tables, and all of that old facade turned into cocktail menus, and I realized I can't build a sanctuary for myself from this. Hundreds of people who have now joined us for an evening might feel that it is their perfect sanctuary, a place of refuge and warmth and safety to be unequivocally themselves and to spend time with the people that they love the most. I hope that some of those people are here today and can attest to how special church is and how it has impacted them. But that night, I looked around and I felt the palpable resentment of the fact that I had built yet another sanctuary, another third place, and another structure that doesn't provide safety for myself. And then something clicked. Quite frankly, it happened as I was writing down what I wanted to say to you all. I remembered the theology I knew and studied about human beings, the belief that we're all made in the image of God. And God, whomever you assign that title to, is determined to be the perfect and pure image of holiness, infallibly so. And to add to our little Sunday school lesson with a little bit of history, sanctuaries, before they existed in buildings, rooms, temples, were just places in nature where the divine and sacred was believed to be especially present. Logic would follow that the divine is present in us all, as bearers of the image of God. And therefore, my most honest and truthful self, the scared child at my core, may very well be my most authentic sanctuary. It was in me all along. And maybe, just maybe, this is true for all of us. When was the last time that you had to face yourself and question your authenticity? What structures have you built to protect you that no longer serve you? if we're each capable of finding sanctuary within ourselves, a safe space where we are innately and intimately known, then let us build up the walls, open the windows, let the music play, invite others in to know our true selves and know the sacred that dwells within us all. We can live in alignment with who we are, each of us at our core. We can save ourselves from that sting of self-betrayal. It's possible to chase the things that align with our nature, dream big dreams, and feel free to hold ourselves with respect and safety. And to do that affects every single part of your life. To be aligned with your innermost sanctuary, the safety and confidence of knowing oneself, allows you to speak truth and honesty, to stand in your power when you must, to stand up for others because you don't have to be an island. But the discovery of sanctuary is never without cost or grief or loss. The process calls you to shed the old things, just as it cost me everything and everyone I knew in some way, just as they had to reconcile with my truth. So remember I said we would get to that talk, it's like a cliffhanger, right? We would get to that point where me being my most authentic self looks like running out of cards, and then I create what I call chaos page. So what do I do now? Where do I go from here? In my life, I can remember the unexpected places where I actually found sanctuary, that safety and confidence of knowing oneself, and I can realize just how much those small moments speak to who I truly am. I found sanctuary in a city park throwing a birthday party for a man in recovery, in being baptized with a plastic bottle of water, on top of a mountain in an autumn rain, on a river in canoes laughing with middle school youth group kids, in a dark karaoke room in New York City, on my best friend's overstuffed couch, in moody coffee shops all over both coasts. But every single one of these places and moments pale in comparison to the sanctuary I found in the process of becoming authentically myself. So if you don't mind, may I introduce myself? My name is Chelsea Gregoire. And to be as transparent as possible, I have been torn down to the very base layer of myself. There is sanctuary in the fact that every day I get to pick up the pieces that I had set down in order to carry all the armor, and I get to learn who I am all over again. I get to spend time with myself as I was before the world told me who I had to be. And I get to figure it out. I get a do-over in many ways. So there are many things I don't know yet, and there is comfort in that unknown. My partner said to me as I was writing this that the concept of arrival is a myth. She's very wise, you should meet her. I may never arrive at a fully formed version of myself. All I can do is be who I am and give myself permission for that to change every day. And it's like being a kid again. It's exciting to learn and see myself renewed. So here are some things that I now know about myself. I am queer and non-binary, and it is fluid as hell, y'all. I love ice cream. I am introverted and pretty weird. I have a chosen family that on paper looks like some gay nonsense, but in practice, it's the only family for me. I know how to cry now, and I do it a lot. See earlier in the talk. I'm sensitive and silly. I require a lot of energy to socialize. I'm a pretty good dancer. I'm in love with an exceptionally intelligent, unconditionally loving, and beautiful woman who wants to know who me is every day, which is very fun. I eat way too much peanut butter. It's true. I like Cameron Crowe movies. I play music again, and consistently for the first time in a decade. I am almost 6 months sober. Thank you. I'm a pretty good cat parent, but I have a long way to go with dogs. We just don't speak the same language. I have a lot of trauma and a lot of work to do with it, but I get to choose how I feel when I want. I'm still working on trusting myself to do the right thing, but I'm getting better at listening to myself. I hate getting messy. I like my handwriting. I enjoy listening to the universe and praying with my partner. I like teaching, but I second guess myself a lot. I'm not alone. I am most respected when I respect myself. My sanctuary, my place of refuge, where the sacred is exceptionally present for me, is in this unfinished journey. I am grieving the fact that my sanctuary is not a physical place that I have built, but I'm encouraged by the fact that I get to start over, rebuild, redefine myself whenever the hell I want. Purpose where there once was pain, freedom where there once was rigidity, holiness where I was once untrue to myself. So what about you? It's the first creative mornings of a new year. And personally, I think resolutions are not the vibe. But if I look out at all of you and I have to leave you with a thought or a call to action, it would be to find peace and freedom in yourself. The peace to accept who you are and do that without betraying yourself. The freedom to create, to scrap what is in process and start again. You have permission to pursue sanctuary in whatever way feels most authentic to you, to find the divine in yourself and in your surroundings. Maybe that's taking your life down to the studs like I did, or maybe it's just finding ritual and refuge in a cup of coffee by yourself. But by all means, do it for you. Because the reality is that you are holy and sacred, and you're worthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. We have a couple minutes for Q&A now. Mario has a handheld mic, and he's going to run around with it. So,
all right, so hands like way in the air because I am blind.
So,
just full disclosure, I don't know any other things about myself, though. So don't ask. I gave you all I got.
I can get us started if there's not one just yet. Oh.
Hey, back here. I know this guy.
Thank you for the talk. Definitely very inspirational. My question to you is, from what I gathered, it sounds like ultimately you found sanctuary in yourself, but there was a journey of building a persona, finding sanctuary in spaces, etc. How was it to cope or deal with realizing that at one point you built up a sanctuary, didn't quite work out, and then moving on to the next iteration and the next iteration, etc. You know, how did it feel to kind of go through that cycle and multiple times and like, oh man, I thought I had it this time, but it didn't work out. So, you know, like how did you cope with that? How did you deal with that? And then ultimately come to be at peace with that on your journey?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to start by saying that it's in process. I can speak to what I've felt so far, which is therapy's great. And it's painful, you know, like you get to this point where you feel like you know who you are, and so you're like living in that, and you're building a whole life around it, which requires a lot of resources. It requires, you know, your own emotional and physical capacity. It requires money. It requires time. It requires all of this capital that we can't necessarily put a price on. And then you wake up one day and you're like, did I waste all of it? You know? And I think that for a long time I felt that it was a waste. Like I just flushed all those things down the drain. But the reality is that, and I say this a lot when people are like, oh, you just now own a bar after you've done 18 restaurant openings. It's the same concept as I learned exactly how not to do it. And I think that, you know, what I said about it having cost and grief and loss is real in whatever level you are experiencing that shedding and rebirth. You know, it's not always as beautiful as a butterfly bursting out of a cocoon. It's often like really gross and messy and painful and not fun. And, but I think it's worth it, especially because I'm looking out your room of creative people, that it's part of your job to like build your persona, right? And it's part of your job to curate what you put out to the world, and that's what social media requires of us, and that's what business requires of us. I think it's worth just like an audit of maybe just looking at it and being like, is this real for me? Is this real, or am I building something that isn't? It's just a lie. Does that make sense?
Got a hand up here, Mario.
I'm coming.
Cool, thanks so much. I didn't expect to cry this morning, but I'm yeah, great. We're all in it together. I'm curious now with this sort of newfound awareness of the need to know yourself and care about yourself, not just other people. How do you reconcile that with continuing to work in, literally the service industry where your job is to create this experience for others and serve them? How do you sort of keep yourself safe and keep in touch with yourself as you continue to do that?
Yeah, okay, that is yet another heavy question. And I guess I welcomed it, right? I just like came out here and I was like, here I am! And then, like, can't expect, like, oh, what's your favorite color? Yeah, one thing that as I was writing and editing this talk, my partner pointed out to me that I hadn't even really thought about before is, remember I was talking about those ideas from my childhood where like it's not about me, nothing is about me, it's about everyone else. Funny enough, I just like entered ministry and then I entered hospitality where it's the same thing. And that is something I'm grappling with, like presently. The fact that I've like built a whole life and career around these ideas that are now antiquated for me. But I think that there is, as with all things in moderation, there's a healthy way to hold yourself accountable and keep yourself safe while also being in the service of others. I think that's part of humanity. And I think that what it boils down to is that you can work in service of other people and you can work to support others as long as you are being honest with yourself, as long as you walk away from every interaction feeling like you didn't betray yourself or you didn't put on that facade again to make other people happy. Because we do that a lot. It's like the idea of hashtags and the idea of like putting this shiny facade on social media is literally, it's not necessarily for us. It's for us to like build this wall around ourselves and to protect ourselves by creating our own narrative. So I guess what I would put to you is the narrative true? Because at the end of the day, if you can walk away from it and you can feel like, yeah, I was true to myself. I had that interaction with a guest and I stood up for myself and I advocated for myself while also delivering truth and also taking care of them instead of, just like kowtowing to whatever they want. The guest is always right is bullshit, by the way.
Yeah.
If you can do that, then that's where the reconciliation happens, and that is active. That is not something that you can just decide overnight, and it's not something I could decide overnight, because I really like when people like me. So, and I think we all do.
Yeah, I think kind of like what you're saying in a lot of ways is that like this is all an ongoing journey. Yeah. Like this, and like for everyone, and like something that I say a lot in conversation is like, paths are usually not linear, and so here we are.
Yeah. Mine looks a little bit like what I call chaos speech, where I just like had to turn to keep speaking to you.
But relatable content, Chelsea. When we are looking for another question, what is your favorite color?
Oh, it literally changes every day. I wear a lot of blue, so people would say that my favorite color is blue, and maybe it is in an unspoken way, but could just look good in it, so I wear it. So I don't know. My favorite color today is this red. I just decided.
Nice, nice, nice.
Do you own a laminator?
There is one at my workplace. I do not personally own a laminator. Like, not outright. I mean, I do, but I don't. You know, it's complicated.
Like taxes.
Do you have any other questions? Oh, we got, yeah, don't be shy, y'all.
Yeah, get those hands up.
Yeah, these will be our last two. We'll go here and then we'll go here.
Hi. So fun fact, I also started going to Creative Mornings in 2014, but it was on the West Coast, and then I took a long break. But yours was my favorite talk so far, so thank you. It resonated a ton. So I love therapy too, like big therapy fan. So my question is, in your journey, your therapy journey, what was the question or concept that challenged you time and time again that you kept, maybe your therapist kept bringing up or that kept coming up for you that you were like, yeah, I'm not there yet, I'm not there yet. Like, is there a specific concept or question that you can share that like got you?
Once again, I'm going to surprise everyone.
Yay.
My main challenge that therapy has constantly put in front of me is that I don't actually like therapy. It's the fact that I get into therapy and I'm frustrated, or in the process of like having this facade, I would like put out this energy of, I got it, we're good. There's like walls put up, and I think this is everyone's challenge with like breaking through in therapy is like showing up authentically so that you can actually work on stuff. So that concept for me is very new, and that's why I like therapy now, because I can like show up and cry, and I know that she doesn't think anything of it. But that was why I didn't go to therapy for so long, is because I was like, it's expensive. They're just gonna be like, you're fine. They're just gonna be like, yeah, shockingly, I'm telling you, y'all, this bulletproof facade really had going on. People thought I was the most normal person in the world, and look at me now. But like, that sucked, because I was like, I'm not gonna waste the money to just sit in a room and continue to not be authentic and not work through anything and not feel like I'm getting anywhere. And I think a lot of people hit that wall with therapy, where the wall that you want to hit with therapy is, I don't feel like we're making headway anymore, and my wall was that I couldn't start. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing about therapy too is that it's like, even though we say like it's not me, it's you kind of thing, but sometimes it is. Like sometimes the therapist isn't the right match,
Right,
which
it's
is a whole
relationship
other,
like everything else.
a whole other thing. I feel like we talk about therapy a lot at Creative Mornings. Therapy, y'all.
Okay,
Get into it.
Not
Yeah.
just like talking about
Will's talk has some therapy in it too. Like, get into it. So we had one other question over. Yes, over here.
Where are we at? Way up high. There you are.
I'm going to stumble my way towards this question. So,
That's fine.
okay. I think
my talk was way too long because I did the exact same thing.
when I think about authentic self and finding an authentic self, I sometimes feel the way, when I feel most authentically myself is actually the moments when I don't think of myself at all. So like worship, like you lose yourself in something bigger, or in nature, like you lose yourself and you lose an awareness of time passing. And then you come to, and you're like, oh, I felt most myself, and I wasn't thinking about myself at all. So the question is kind of like, what's that dynamic like for you? So you're doing some intense, looking inward, and that's a way to look for yourself and be true. And then are there ways you look outward and lose yourself to find yourself, if that makes sense?
Right. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I think that like those moments, so remember talking about sanctuaries being like where it can be anywhere, it exists in nature, it's like where the divine is most present. I think those moments that you're talking about is when our divinity and the divinity of where you are meet, and there's just like this universal understanding of something bigger, right? For me, it looks a little different, not in the sense that I don't feel that when I like look outwardly, because obviously like I'm still in hospitality every day and I go to the bar and like I look outside of myself all the time. But I spent so long disregarding anything about myself, like any sort of self-care or any sort of self-reflection or any sort of careful attention to even how like my words are delivered or how I come across in like the ways that I would put on the persona, right? I spent so much time that there was such an imbalance. And so a lot of people would look at that and be like, oh, that's really selfish that you're like focusing on yourself now. But for so long, I ignored every basic need that I had. Like, I'm playing catch up. I'm like starting to say like, okay, yeah, I know what I have to do in this situation, but like, how do I feel about it? Which is not a question I ask myself before. It doesn't have to be like, what do I want from this, or what do I get out of it? But it's like, how do I feel about it? How does it reflect itself in my own life? Because then it can be both. Does that make sense? I feel sometimes so this is new. Maybe this is another thing I know about myself. My partner says that I talk like Swiss cheese, which is when I say it and this and that instead of using nouns. And so sometimes when I say things, people are like, I don't know what you're saying. So I hope that makes sense.
Y'all, help me thank Chelsea again.